leading the investigation in what officials call an intentional act.
Okay, I'm gonna look at some more details from this Nashville mystery bombing, and this is the location of where the RV was parked. The artwork that's covering the window here can still be visible in the background here. So this is where the RV detonates, and I'm using my video editing software so I can go back and forth, and I'm going to do a frame-by-frame analysis for this video right here, and in particular the behavior of this traffic signal. And there's some weird things going on here that I just want to point out. So I don't know if the traffic signal is plastic or has the aluminum housing, but in terms of the classical physics of what we're seeing, it doesn't really matter. So this is where the traffic signal was, hanging on this bar. And this CCTV footage is the closest video recording of the actual blast. You can see the RV parked right here, and there's a white SUV type vehicle parked behind it. And in front of the RV there are two more cars that burned. And this SUV here got hit with a couple trees and caught on fire and burned. So a total of 4 vehicles were destroyed, and very little of the RV was remaining. So I'm just going to play this here. So it's quite a blast, quite a lot of light emitting. It lights up the whole street for a few seconds, and you can see the traffic signal just sort of disintegrating and falling down. One of the interesting things about this, and I'll talk more about it in another video, is the debris field that this blast makes. In this picture, it's difficult to see where the point of detonation is. Normally you have some kind of crater with a radial pattern of damage around it, but all the buildings that were damaged produced this debris field, covered up part of it, but there's a whole lot of dust in the middle of the street, a lot of fine particulate matter left over from this detonation of whatever it was. And it's, by the way, it's not clear what this explosive device is. I've been very interested from a technical standpoint what kind of materials could detonate to create the visual effects of the debris field and the damage. There's a lot of really highly localized damage of the adjacent buildings. They're just completely blown out. And there's other strange things like the crater that it made. And the proportion of the damage to surrounding buildings, it's a relatively small crater. Some unusual features about it. Here's the RV, what's left of it. And there's another view of the crater. But like I said, I'll talk more about that in the other video. These are holes in the utility tunnels that were next to the RV. And there's the debris field again. So I'm going to just do a frame-by-frame analysis for this traffic signal getting destroyed. And there's a couple features that I just wanted to point out and wanted to pay attention to. This traffic divider right here, this plastic pole that's attached to the pavement, and the timing of the camera that gets out of whack. So here's the point of blast where all the chaos starts, and it's too much light for the camera to handle, so it just kind of blurs everything out. Can't really see that much. But you can see that this traffic divider here is still standing. You can see the shadow here and here. And then in the next frame, the pressure wave from the blast hits the camera and knocks it out of alignment. But we can still see the traffic signal in the field of view. So something hits the camera after 4 frames. And by the way, this is low resolution video that's not 30 frames per second. It's more like 5 frames per second. So it's not really giving a very complete picture, but we can see some things here. So here's the traffic signal in question, which you can now see as the fireball, or whatever that is, starts to rise upwards. And what's strange is there appears to be some kind of power surge going on with the adjacent signal on the same pole. The lights on the traffic pole are still on, and the signal here is really bright. And in the next frame, you can see the middle one goes out, and these top and bottom ones are still on. When it starts, they're both red, the light on top. So something's happening with the electrical connections of the traffic signals. And in the next frame there, both are out. The lights on the pole are still on. And then something happens to this signal here. It starts to get cocked to the side, like it got hit by something. But in the next frame, it's still kind of there. It's not really clear what's going on, if it's twisting around. See, the traffic signals are facing forward, so there's these metal visors that are on there, and there's a metal pole, like a bracket, that attaches the signal and aligns it vertically and attaches it to the pole. So if anything was coming from the blast, it probably would have hit the mounting pole first. But it's really not clear what is hitting the traffic signal. And it hits the ground and just kind of shatters. I mean, whether it's plastic or aluminum, it still has to be somewhat durable to survive severe weather conditions and ice and that sort of thing. So it's not unreasonable to think that it could have been hit by something from the blast. And if you look here in the background, there's this tree branch that's coming down, and it kind of looks like it's hitting the traffic signal in these 2 frames. But if you go forward, you can see later where this branch hits the ground. So that's 2 trees back from the tree that's adjacent to the traffic signal pole. So that branch that's coming down is very likely in the background. And there's really, it looks like there's kind of something here hitting the pavement, but in other photos, aerial photos, it doesn't really look like there's much there. So I think it's just some dust that's hitting the pavement. And again, not really close enough to the traffic signal pole. So it's really not clear what is getting this traffic signal to come off the pole and just disintegrate. So here's a visor that comes off, and it's hard to see when exactly the visors come off. There's one right here, and then another one goes sailing, makes an arc in a different direction. We'll go forward a couple. There it just starts to become visible right here, where the other one has already hit the ground. There's the visor again. So that visor is actually the last thing to hit the ground. We'll fast forward a little bit. And you can clearly see it here on the ground here. So this is a visor, this is a visor, and the third one is still attached to part of the housing. So here's what I want to point out. So you can see in this frame, this is frame number 6. This is frame number 5. And 4 you can't really see much. But in frame number 5 you can see this traffic divider is cut in half like a tree. It just falls over. So something sliced through it, and the timing of when that happened would have been probably right after this big light emission. So you see the light first, and then the pressure wave and the debris start flying. So you've got shrapnel of metal shooting out like bullets, supposedly, and that could cut this traffic divider in half. So that's what I would expect to see in terms of the timing of the blast and the pressure wave and the flying debris. But the traffic signal in question is still there. It has remained in its position, and so I don't think it would be reasonable to assume that it's already getting hit by something, because it's just not reacting. That's one of the laws of physics, that an object remains at rest unless acted on by some outside force. But here in this frame, you can see that that outside force, whatever it is acting on the traffic signal, but it's a good 3 or 4 frames after when we could expect that to happen. So it's like a half a second off in timing. So it just doesn't make sense. So, and then we have this power surge going through the other traffic signals. So is whatever's acting on this signal in question, is that related to the power surge, or is that related to some kind of debris flying? Now, I've been thinking critically about this, and it is possible that debris could have flown up into the air vertically. There is evidence of debris on the rooftops of adjacent buildings. So perhaps something made a long arc and then came down. But there's nothing hitting the pavement other than the traffic signal at that time, unless somehow it bounces off and goes off the field of view. But it's really not clear what's going on there. So the timing of the traffic signal getting whacked by something is not consistent with what we would expect for the pressure wave or the flying debris from the detonation inside a vehicle. The distance between the RV and the traffic signal is roughly 250 to 270 feet away. So the camera is about maybe 350 feet away. So anything flying at high velocity probably would not show up in the field of view. It would go in between frames. Lots of sparks flying. Look over here. There's some kind of object hitting the ground, making a little puff of smoke or dust, and then flying into sparks. All kinds of sparky stuff coming down. And it makes a sizable impact here on the ground. And whatever that material is, it's obviously energetic. So whatever kind of dust or residue is left over from these sparks would have to be related to whatever's making this detonation so energetic. So that should be investigated. That should be something obvious. All this sparky material coming down. It's just an impressive waterfall of material. I mean, it looks like a metal foundry pouring molten metal, and maybe some kind of accident. It's just pouring out of this fireball and hitting the ground, and then making some kind of reaction on the ground. For a moment it's molten or still reacting or on fire. I mean, it's really kind of strange. And then there's this big cloud of dust right here that just comes down. Maybe that's a tree, I'm not really sure. Kind of looks like it could be a tree. So if I go forward a little bit more in the clip, there continues to rain down this energetic debris. It hits the ground and makes a kind of spectacle. I guess this is what the experts were talking about when they used the term pyrotechnic show. So this stuff that comes down seems to be more concentrated on the other side of the street. Now look at that. When it hits the ground, it just lights up. So what is that material? Obviously it was launched pretty far up in the air. This is a few seconds after. Very strange. And then there's this thing up in the cloud here. I think there's debris that actually hits a tree branch and gets stuck and burns there for a second. Right at the very top corner of the screen here. Almost looks like a comet coming down. What is that? This is way after the fact. This is one of the last things to be burning. And then look at this fire here that just kind of creeps in the background out of nowhere. Now, the resolution is reduced a little bit in my software, but you can just see that the fire just kind of starts. And I think that's where the RV was parked, right there in that spot. And this fire just kind of creeps out of nowhere. Very strange. You can see the police car lights in the background there. If I go all the way back to the start, you can't see those lights. There's a very dense cloud of dust and debris. And then after these sparks clear up, the smoke starts to blow over, and now you can see the lights again. If I go to the very beginning, you can see where they are. Here's where the RV is. And by the way, this is the closest traffic signal control box located at the other end of the street. And based on the condition of the outside, it does not look like it's been damaged from the explosion or fire. But who knows what might be going on inside in relation to this electrical blowout on the traffic pole. So maybe the traffic signal was hit by some kind of sparky stuff that made it twist around and fall off and disappear. I mean, there should be some wires hanging off the pole. It's almost like the wires vaporized and exploded. Whatever. So, in conclusion, the main things that I think are weird or off in regards to the behavior of this traffic signal is the timing of its initiation of change is not consistent with what would be expected for a high pressure, high velocity blast with high velocity shrapnel being ejected outwards. And the reaction of it is inconsistent with the kinetics of what would be expected for an impact with a high velocity object, because if there was a high velocity impact, there'd be a drastic change in between any two frames. But in this case, there's a slow change and an acceleration, as though it's just mostly gravity acting on it. And that just doesn't really make sense. It's almost like the connections are being destroyed internally, or there's some kind of explosion internally which causes the metal visors to eject outwards in opposite directions. That's not really consistent with being struck from behind. And then you've got this power surge business going on coincidentally, and that just makes it look even weirder. So I don't know what to make of this, and like I said, it's just low resolution video, and there's no good shots of the physical evidence up close to see if anything happened to it, to identify what it was made out of, etc. So it's not really much more to investigate, but I just wanted to point out some things.
Downtown